The station never announced arrivals the way people expected. No trumpets, no ceremonial docking lights, no polite corporate message saying, "Please welcome your potential existential crisis." Things simply appeared on manifests that had already been printed, signed, and argued over by people who were now conveniently off shift. That was how Jalen first saw her name, not that it meant anything at the time. Cargo lists in the Orpheus relay station were known to hallucinate under pressure. Last week, a crate had been labeled fresh air, slightly used, and nobody had the energy to investigate further. Jalen was halfway into a maintenance crawlspace, arguing with a stubborn conduit that refused to acknowledge the concept of electrical flow when his wrist terminal pinged. He ignored it at first. Machines tended to complain dramatically before doing anything useful. But then it pinged again and again, with the tone usually reserved for things like hull breaches or tax audits. He sighed, tapped it open, and read the line that simply said, "Unregistered passenger docked, Bay 12. Underneath it, a second line flickered in and out like it wasn't sure it wanted to exist. Status: Cursed entity, do not engage without authorization. Jalen blinked slowly. Cursed, he muttered. That's new, we upgraded from hazardous material to mythology. The conduit chose that moment to finally work, releasing a spark that singed his sleeve and his patience in equal measure. He crawled out, swearing at both technology and whoever had decided that insulation was an optional feature. Bay 12 was supposed to be empty. It was always supposed to be empty. That was its entire job. It existed so other, more important bays could feel successful. But when Jalen arrived, it was not empty. She was sitting on a storage crate like she had paid for the privilege. No restraints, no escort. No frantic security officers yelling instructions into radios that weren't on. Just silence and the faint hum of the station trying very hard not to acknowledge her presence. At first glance, she looked human enough that his brain tried to file her under confused tourist. Then it immediately changed its mind. Her ears were long, softly curved, not quite like any species he had seen in recruitment posters or illegal bar advertisements. They moved slightly when she shifted her attention, as if listening to things the station wasn't broadcasting on public channels. Her eyes carried a strange, layered reflection, like distant starfields had been stacked behind one another and told to behave. She looked at him, he looked back. A maintenance drone nearby attempted to scan her, then quietly reversed its own scanning beam and hovered away as if it suddenly remembered it had somewhere else to be. Jalen cleared his throat. So, he said, because silence always made him feel like he was about to be billed for it. You lost? She tilted her head slightly. No, that was it, no panic, no fear. No desperate explanation about stolen passports or interstellar misunderstandings. Just calm certainty, like she had been asked whether water was wet. Jalen gestured vaguely around the bay. Because usually people who aren't lost don't end up in cargo intake with a curse label attached to their existence. At the word curse, something in the air shifted, not dramatically. More like the station briefly forgot which direction up was supposed to be, then corrected itself awkwardly. She glanced at the hovering drone, it beeped once and pretended it was off. I was not labeled correctly, she said. That's one way to put it, Jalen replied. The other way is that someone somewhere really doesn't want paperwork involving you to continue existing. From the corridor behind him, someone coughed loudly in the specific way that meant they were listening but didn't want to be emotionally accountable for it. Jalen turned his head slightly. If this is a prank, I want it noted that it's not funny. A voice responded immediately. We didn't prank you. That's worse, Jalen said. The woman on the crate observed all of this with mild curiosity, like she was watching a documentary about a species that had recently discovered disappointment. She swung her legs slightly. The motion caused one of the nearby lights to flicker in sympathy. Jalen noticed. So, he said carefully, do you have a name or should I just label you like the station did? Because I've got suggestions. Entity of questionable administrative status is available. A pause. Then she said something that did not translate cleanly through his implant. The system tried anyway, producing a string of poetic nonsense that resolved into echo of the third unfinished song. Jalen stared at the translation, then at her. That sounds like a band that only plays in abandoned spaceports. It is sufficient, she replied. Yeah, he said, it's definitely something. He tapped his terminal again. The station feed was already updating itself, which was never a good sign. Security logs were forming opinions. Docking permissions were reconsidering their life choices. One vending machine somewhere in the corridor dispensed 3 identical drinks and immediately apologized for it. A notification popped up, "Do not interact without supervision." Jalen looked up. "I assume you saw that too." Echo followed his gaze to the floating text. "Yes, and it is incorrect." That's reassuringly unhelpful. From somewhere deeper in the station, an alarm chirped once, then stopped, as if it had reconsidered the emotional impact of continuing. Jalen exhaled. "Okay, here's the deal. I'm not security, I'm not a diplomat. I fix things that make noises they're not supposed to make. You are currently one of those things." Echo considered this. "Do I make noise? Not physically. More like reality gets weird when you're around." "That is not my intention." "Great, neither is most of the station's behavior, but here we are." A pause stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but slightly uncertain, like the universe was waiting for someone to declare a policy. Then Echo said, "They avoid me." "Yeah," Jalen said. "Station culture, we avoid everything that might increase paperwork." "They call me cursed." "Station culture also loves drama." A soft sound came from her that might have been amusement or possibly a star somewhere losing its job. Jalen scratched the back of his neck. "Look, I'm going to level with you. I don't know what you are, I don't know why you're here, and I definitely don't know why the lights are doing that thing where they flicker like they're nervous." "They are listening," Echo said. "That's not comforting." A maintenance bot rolled past them, paused, rotated slightly toward Echo, then rolled away faster than before, as if it had just remembered an urgent appointment with literally anywhere else. Jalen pointed at it. "See? Even the robots are socially distancing." Echo watched it go. "I am not harmful." "That's what the cursed file says too," Jalen replied. "It's not very convincing." At that moment, the vending machine down the corridor dispensed a single cup of soup without being prompted. Then a second. Then 17 more in rapid succession. A long silence followed, as if the machine was waiting to be judged. Jalen closed his eyes briefly. "I'm not cleaning that up." Echo tilted her head again. "It is reacting to me." "Yeah," Jalen said, "that's the running theory for everything today." For the first time, she looked faintly uncertain. "Not afraid, just recalibrating something internal." "I do not know why," she said. "Well," Jalen replied, "neither does the vending machine, and it still has a job." A sound like distant static rolled through the station, and somewhere a door opened on its own, then politely closed itself again as if embarrassed. Jalen pointed at Echo's ears without thinking, then immediately regretted it. "Do those pick up station systems or something?" "They listen," she said simply. "To what?" A pause, things that were not finished speaking. Jalen decided not to ask follow-up questions he couldn't afford emotionally. Instead, he leaned against a crate, crossed his arms, and said, "All right, echo of the extremely inconvenient song. Until someone higher up tells me otherwise, you're not going anywhere." Mostly because I suspect anywhere is currently refusing visitors. From the corridor, someone shouted, "We are absolutely refusing visitors." Jalen shouted back, not helping. Echo watched him with a calm that didn't match the slowly accumulating chaos around them. The station lights dimmed, then brightened again like it was trying to breathe normally. "I was not meant to be kept," she said. "Yeah," Jalen replied. "Well, neither was this job, and look at us thriving." That earned a pause from her, a longer one this time. Something subtle shifted in the air again, like probability briefly considered a different career path. Then very quietly Echo said, "You are not afraid." Jalen snorted. "I fix broken gravity toilets for a living. Fear left my system years ago." A beat. Then he added, "It might still be around, just in storage." For the first time, something like a smile touched her expression, brief and uncertain, as if it had not been used often and was still reading the instruction manual. And outside the bay, the station continued to quietly pretend it had no opinion about any of this, while slowly failing at that task in increasingly creative ways. Jalen learned very quickly that the worst part of dealing with unknown cosmic anomalies was not the anomalies themselves. It was everyone else reacting to them like they had just discovered religion and decided to immediately start a committee. By the second station cycle after Echo's arrival, Bay 12 had become the most over-monitored location in Orpheus relay station history. Security drones hovered in overlapping patrol patterns like anxious insects trying to convince themselves they were doing something meaningful. 2 corporate observers had arrived, neither of whom blinked at the same time, which Jalen found deeply unsettling in a way he could not technically report as a malfunction. Echo, meanwhile, remained in Bay 12 as if she had simply rented it for an extended stay and was mildly surprised by the additional audience. Jalen was repairing a coolant regulator that had developed an emotional attachment to overheating when his terminal pinged again. This time the message came pre-labeled urgent, which in station language meant we have screamed at this problem internally for at least 10 minutes. He opened it. Interaction protocol update. Entity echo of third unfinished song must not be left unobserved. Jalen stared at it for a long moment. Unobserved, he repeated. That's a new kind of creepy. From across the bay, Echo lifted her gaze. They are watching. Yeah, Jalen said, they've built an entire economy around it. A nearby drone rotated slightly toward him as if offended by the accuracy. Echo tilted her head. Her ears shifted subtly like they were trying to catch conversations happening in adjacent dimensions. It is increasing. What is the attention? Jalen tapped the coolant pipe. It immediately cooled down out of spite. That's what happens when you show up labeled cosmic curse. People love a good apocalypse rumor, makes them feel like they're part of something bigger than their shift schedule. One of the corporate observers entered Bay 12 without announcing themselves. Nobody ever announced themselves anymore. It was considered too emotional. They were tall, thin, wearing a uniform that looked like it had been designed by someone who had only ever read the word authority in dictionaries and never met it in person. We need to perform a standard containment assessment, the observer said. Jalen didn't look up. Is that the part where you stand too close to things and hope confidence is a substitute for understanding? The observer ignored him. A common survival strategy in corporate environments. Echo watched them with mild curiosity. Containment, she said. Yes, the observer replied. You are classified as a reality-adjacent hazard. Jalen muttered, that sounds like a bad Yelp review. Echo blinked slowly. I do not wish to be a hazard. Good news, Jalen said. Neither does anyone else. Unfortunately, we're all stuck with the version of reality that forgot to install a user manual. The observer activated a scanning field. It passed over Echo and immediately began recalibrating itself, like it had encountered a mathematical problem that refused to acknowledge its own existence. The scanner beeped once, then emitted a tone that could only be described as regret. The observer frowned. Unstable readings. Echo looked at the scanning light as if it were something mildly annoying like dust. I am stable, she said. The scanner disagreed loudly by producing 17 identical error messages and then refusing to participate further. Jalen leaned toward the coolant pipe. That's the first time I've seen a machine give up mid-judgment. From the corridor, a maintenance bot rolled by and very deliberately avoided eye contact with Bay 12. The observer turned to Jalen. You are assigned to this sector? Unfortunately, yes. Then you are responsible for her supervision. Jalen blinked. I fix pipes that cry when they get stressed. I am not emotionally licensed for interstellar containment policy. Your objections are noted, the observer said, which was not the same as heard, considered, or respected. Echo watched the exchange quietly, then she asked, why do they fear me? The observer hesitated. Jalen answered instead, because you're currently the most interesting thing happening in a place that survives on boredom. That is not fear, Echo said. Sure it is, Jalen replied. Humans just like to rebrand it as risk management so it feels less embarrassing. The observer cleared their throat. You are interfering with classification procedures. Jalen gestured vaguely. Proceed faster. I've got a coolant pipe developing existential dread. Echo stood up from the crate. The motion was small, almost casual, but the station lighting adjusted instantly like it had just been reminded of something it had forgotten on purpose. The observer's scanner suddenly stabilized, then destabilized again, then stabilized in a completely different configuration that no one had authorized. Echo looked at it. It is confused. It is trying its best, Jalen said. The observer frowned harder. This is not standard behavior. Jalen nodded. Yeah, welcome to Bay 12. We don't really do standard, we do surprisingly functional despite all evidence. At that moment, every vending machine on the corridor simultaneously dispensed one identical beverage and then paused, as if waiting for applause. Nobody applauded. The machines appeared personally offended. Echo stepped slightly forward. The observer instinctively stepped back, then seemed annoyed at themselves for doing it. I do not understand what I am doing to them, Echo said. Jalen wiped his hands on a rag that had long ago given up on cleanliness. You're making reality uncomfortable. That is not intentional. Most disasters aren't, he said. That's kind of their whole branding. The observer activated a secondary protocol. A holographic interface unfolded in the air, projecting corporate classification charts, containment theories, and something labeled Speculative Cosmic Liability Index. Jalen squinted at it. That's not a real measurement. It is proprietary, the observer replied. That's a polite way of saying we made it up and hope no one asks questions. Echo tilted her head again. Liability, yes, the observer said. You are an anomaly with measurable risk of environmental destabilization. Jalen raised a hand. Quick clarification, does environment include like my lunch schedule because it's already unstable? The observer did not respond. Echo looked down at her hands. For a moment the station lighting dimmed slightly as if reacting to her attention. I did not choose this, she said quietly. Jalen leaned against the crate again. Nobody does. I didn't choose to be assigned to a station where the gravity systems occasionally negotiate their working hours, but here we are. A faint sound echoed through the bay like distant static layered with something almost musical. The air itself felt briefly stretched as if the station had forgotten how wide it was supposed to be. The observer's scanner screamed, then shut itself down in protest. Echo blinked once. Then everything returned to normal. The observer looked shaken in a professionally repressed way. That fluctuation must be isolated. Jalen sighed. Or hear me out, we stop poking the thing labeled reality-sensitive unknown with corporate sticks. The observer pointed at Echo. She is the source. Jalen shrugged. Or she's standing next to it. You ever think maybe the station is just like this? A maintenance drone passed behind them and briefly reversed direction for no apparent reason. Nobody commented on it. Echo turned slightly toward Jalen. You are not afraid of them either. I'm afraid of paperwork, he corrected. Everything else is just physics doing improv. That got another faint, uncertain smile from her, short-lived like it wasn't sure it had permission to exist. The observer stepped back. This situation will be escalated. Of course it will, Jalen said. Please make sure it escalates somewhere far away from my shift schedule. The observer left without further ceremony. The silence they left behind was heavier than before. Echo sat down again on the crate. They will return. Yeah, Jalen said. They always do, usually with more forms and less imagination. She looked at him. What will you do? Jalen glanced at the coolant pipe, which had finally stabilized and was now pretending it had never been emotional in the first place. I'll probably fix something, he said. That's kind of my thing, fixing things or at least convincing them they're fixed until someone more important notices. Echo studied him for a long moment. Why do you remain? Jalen shrugged. Because if I leave, I'll just end up somewhere else arguing with a different broken system. At least this one has slightly better lighting. A pause, then very quietly Echo said, You are unusual. He snorted. That's one word for it. I've also been called structurally concerning and legally inconvenient. For the first time, she made a sound that was unmistakably laughter, though it seemed to arrive slightly late like it had traveled a long distance to get there. The station lights flickered in response. Somewhere deep in its systems, a notification appeared and then immediately deleted itself, as if it had decided this was not its problem. And for a brief moment, Bay 12 felt less like a containment zone and more like a place where reality had stopped pretending it was entirely in control. By the time the third wave of ships arrived, Jalen had stopped being surprised by the number of ways the universe could say, "This is your problem now," without ever using those exact words. The station did not announce the fleet. It simply began behaving like it was trying to remember something it had deliberately forgotten. Lights stuttered in long, hesitant rhythms. Gravity shifted half a centimeter to the left, then pretended it hadn't. Even the vending machines refused to dispense anything, which Jalen considered the most alarming sign of all. Echo stood in the center of Bay 12, no longer sitting on the crate. She wasn't restrained because nothing physical on the station had ever successfully agreed on the idea of restraining her. Not locks, not fields, not the 3 security drones that had once attempted it and immediately resigned from existence as functional units. Jalen leaned against a console that was currently arguing with itself about whether it still had a job. So, he said, either we're about to get audited, invaded, rescued, or all 3 in a very inconvenient order. Echo's ears shifted slightly. They are coming for me. Yeah, Jalen said, that's been the theme lately. You really should start charging admission. From the bay doors, the first corporate fleet emerged into docking range like a very expensive mistake. Sleek ships, polished insignias, the kind of design language that said we have never been emotionally impacted by consequences. Their arrival broadcast filled the station channels immediately. Entity recovery protocol initiated. Do not interfere. Jalen pointed at the speaker. That's the least reassuring sentence I've ever heard. Echo watched the ships with something that was not fear, but something quieter. Like anticipation that had been waiting a long time and was unsure whether it should be happy about finally being called. They believe I am a containment failure, she said. Jalen scratched his head. To be fair, so does half the station. The other half thinks you're a maintenance myth. A pause. Am I a failure? She asked. Jalen didn't answer immediately, which was unusual for him. He usually filled silence the way other people filled out emergency forms, quickly and without reading the instructions. Instead, he looked at the ships, at the flickering station lights, at the way even the air seemed slightly unsure of its own stability. No, he said finally, you're not a failure, you're just poorly explained. One of the ships opened a docking channel. A voice came through, calm and practiced. Subject identified as Echo of third unfinished song, prepare for extraction. Echo tilted her head. Extraction implies ownership. Jalen nodded. Corporate language is basically ownership with better grammar. From the corridor, a maintenance bot rolled past, paused, then reversed direction slowly, like it had decided it was not emotionally prepared for this conversation. Echo took a step forward. The station reacted immediately, not violently, not dramatically, more like reality briefly forgot which rules were currently active. The docking bay lights inverted their brightness. Shadows appeared in places that had no physical source. One of the consoles printed the phrase, "Please stop doing that," before catching fire out of embarrassment. Jalen raised a hand. Okay, small suggestion, maybe don't walk like that. I am not doing anything, Echo said. That's what makes it worse, Jalen replied. The corporate fleet responded instantly. A containment field expanded outward, designed to stabilize anomalies by force. It passed through Echo and then immediately failed to agree with itself about what it was supposed to do. The field collapsed into a very neat sphere and then politely deleted itself. A pause followed. From the fleet channel, a different voice came through, less confident now, recalibrating containment strategy. Jalen muttered, "That's corporate for we are now improvising legally." Echo looked at him. They will continue. Yeah, he said, people like them always do. They don't like problems that don't fit into categories, especially not problems that don't pay licensing fees. Echo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I am the problem. Jalen pushed off the console. No, you're the symptom. The problem is whatever decided reality should have paperwork. That got her attention in a different way. The air around them stabilized slightly as if listening more carefully. From the fleet, a new transmission arrived. This time it was not an order, it was a projection. A data structure unfolded in the air showing Echo's internal readings. But it wasn't just measurements, it was history. Regions of collapsed probability. Echo was not cursed. She was a boundary, a living interface between structured reality and something that did not follow structured reality at all. The curse was containment bleed. Jalen squinted at it. So let me get this straight, you're not unlucky, you're basically a cosmic pressure valve. Echo considered this. That is an inaccurate metaphor. Yeah, Jalen said, but it's the kind of metaphor I can understand without a degree in existential geometry. The fleet's voice returned. Subject must be secured. Without stabilization, localized reality degradation risk increases. Jalen looked up at the ships. Quick question, has anyone tried not poking her with a stick? Silence. He nodded. Yeah, thought so. Echo's ears lowered slightly. If I am removed, what happens? The projection flickered. The answer came reluctantly. Uncontained region expansion, structural inconsistency. Potential collapse of localized physical law integrity. Jalen whistled softly. So everything gets weird and then stops agreeing with itself. Correct, the fleet confirmed. Jalen turned back to Echo. Okay, that's new. Usually I only get systems that threaten to explode. This is more like philosophical weather. Echo looked at her hands again. The station lights dimmed around her fingers, not aggressively, just responding. I did not wish harm, she said. Yeah, Jalen said. And I didn't wish to be assigned to a station where vending machines develop emotional breakdowns. Wishes are not doing great today. A pause. Then Jalen did something he didn't usually do. He stepped closer. The station did not like that. Gravity adjusted slightly like it was bracing itself. You've been alone since you got here, he said. And before that too, I'm guessing. Echo didn't answer, but she didn't deny it. He shrugged. So here's the part where I'm supposed to do something heroic or strategic or whatever the people in charge think is normal. But I don't really do those. He glanced at the fleet. I fix things. He tapped the console behind him. It immediately stopped sparking. I fix pipes, systems, sometimes people's expectations when they get too loud. He looked back at Echo. And right now, the thing that needs fixing is everyone thinking you're a malfunction instead of whatever you actually are. Echo's expression shifted slightly. You would oppose them. Jalen snorted. Oppose is a strong word. I'm more of a mildly inconvenience large institutions until they leave me alone kind of guy. The fleet began deploying secondary stabilization protocols. Reality around Bay 12 tightened. For a moment, it looked like Echo might be compressed out of alignment with the station entirely. Jalen sighed. Okay, new plan. He walked to the main station interface. Station, he said. The system hesitated. Yes, it replied, as if unsure whether it should still recognize him. Stop cooperating with external containment protocols. That is not recommended, the station replied. I didn't ask for recommendation. I asked for compliance. A pause, then slowly the station responded. Clarification, compliance motivated by what? Jalen looked at Echo, then at the fleet, then back at the console. Self-preservation, he said. And also because I've had enough paperwork to last a lifetime. The station paused, then something changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but decisively. Docking clamps disengaged. Containment fields lost synchronization. Fleet access routes began closing one by one, not violently, but like doors politely deciding they were done being doors. From the fleet channel, station interference detected, then static, then silence. The ship stalled, unable to maintain interface with a station that had just stopped agreeing with their authority. For the first time, Echo exhaled slowly. The air stabilized, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough. Jalen leaned back. Well, that's one way to get fired from corporate oversight. Echo turned to him. You altered their systems? Yeah, he said. Turns out if you talk to stations like they're tired coworkers instead of machines, they sometimes listen. A faint pause, then Echo said, You are unusual. He smiled slightly. You already said that. I mean it differently now. That's probably not reassuring. The station lighting steadied. The fleet retreated slowly, not defeated so much as unwilling to continue an argument with an environment that had stopped following its rules. And then, finally, Bay 12 was quiet. Echo remained, not contained, not extracted. Just present, Jalen sat down on the crate she had once used, as if reclaiming it for normal gravity purposes. So, he said, what now? Echo looked at him for a long time. I do not know. Good, he said. That means you're basically qualified for station life. A pause, then very softly she asked, Will I always be a problem? Jalen shook his head. Nah, he said, you're just a place where reality gets honest. People hate that.